Hi, everybody. It's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about using non-combat skills in combat. This comes from a question from IE50, who asked, I don't know if you've done a video on this, but I was wondering about your thoughts on how traditionally non-combat skills can assist in combat. You've mentioned how skill-based games can result in players making dud characters because they end up sucking in combat. What about having those skills have related perks or actions that are valuable in combat? Or the more common option is having certain combat actions scale off non-combat skills. Examples: intelligence skills scale medicine, charisma skills for team buffs, etc. It's a good question. And like you mentioned, I thought I had done a video on this, but I didn't. I just bring it up here and there. So I thought I'd make a video where we'd talk specifically about non-combat skills and how they could be made more useful in combat. And then I'm going to end this video with a question for you guys, the viewer, which no one's ever asked, which I believe is telling. But I'm going to start off by saying it is really common to have some non-combat skills have effects in combat. The one that's in tons of games, including my own, is when your stealth skills give you a bonus sneak attack in combat. Often this is one and done, because once you attack, you're not stealthed anymore. But it does usually give you a powerful first attack to kind of offset the fact that maybe your stealth skills aren't going to be that high, because you spent points that you could have spent in combat in stealth. But The Outer Worlds took this a lot farther, and if you haven't played it, here's a little summary. So we had leadership skills, because I was in Outer Worlds, I was playing with a fourth way of playing games beyond combat and stealth and talking, and that was leadership. That's where you bought skills that made your companions better, and then you relied on your companions more in combat, in stealth, in dialogue. They could contribute to how good you were in each of those spheres. So the leadership section of skills was divided up into inspiration and determination. And those skills were involved in the calculation of the damage output of your companions, as well as how much health they had. So being a strong leader gave you better companions in combat. Similarly, the dialogue skills, there were 3 dialogue skills in the Outer Worlds: persuasion, lie, and intimidate. And those affected dialogue, and they affected them in different ways. Persuasion was you convincing someone to do something. Lying was being able to convince somebody that you're saying something that isn't true, but it is true. And intimidate is just scaring someone into, look, do what I say and no one gets hurt. But each one of those had a separate effect in combat. Persuasion meant whenever you attack someone, there was a chance they would cower, and a human would cower and stop fighting back temporarily. Lying did something similar on automechs. It would scramble them. I saw that one as you going, hey, 1 is divided by 0, or, what I'm saying now is a lie, and they're just getting all confused. It's stupid, but it provided a nice, silly way of having that have an effect. And then intimidate would terrify creatures, so non-humans. So that covered all 3 things we had in Outer Worlds. We had humans, non-humans, and automechs. All of those skills had perks or skill unlocks as you went up that also improved on the things they could do, sometimes in combat. So there were additional things you could get. What I thought here is what I would talk about here is if you want additional combat-related effects that you can attach to other skills, whether they're stealth or speech or leadership or whatever you're doing in your game. And also, in addition to the skills, they can also be attached to perks. These are all things that are just general things that can make combat easier for the person who isn't necessarily investing all their points in combat skills. So I broke them up. I think there were 5 big things I figured you could do, and they would make sense. The first one is just let the player character get targeted less often. So if they go into combat and they have 4 companions, you would think there'd be a 20% chance they'd be targeted. Make it less than that. And then you can attach it to one of the speech skills or a leadership skill or a perk that requires a minimum in one of those skills, because you can see that as the enemies are going after your minions first. It's something that you see people do in a lot of games where you take care of the yard trash before you take care of the boss. They do the same thing. And those skills just make it more likely for them to do that. Another one is increasing the chance that enemy attackers will switch away from you if they've targeted you. So once they've targeted you, maybe they hit you once and then they go decide to hit someone else. This could be based on a lot of different things. This could be based on speech skill, and you could have, when they switch, your character could say something like, yeah, you better run. And maybe that's attached to their intimidation skill. Or, I'll talk about this in a second, but you could even assign a physical stat like beauty, and they're just like, I can't attack this guy anymore. He's super ugly. Related to that, you could have the player either, when someone's attacking them, they attack less often, so their rate of attack reduces, or when they hit, they do less damage. Mathematically, these are about the same. Slight differences because somebody who's attacking more often may be harder to block, or attacking less often may be easier to block, and somebody who attacks for less damage may not then be able to get through your damage threshold or your damage resistance, whatever your armor is. So they're slightly different, but you can think of them as you still are being attacked by the enemy, but they're doing less damage because they're either not attacking you as frequently or the attacks are doing less damage. And again, this could be attached to one of those non-combat skills and explained away as they're scared of you, they're intimidated of you, they're, or maybe you're so good looking that they don't want to hurt. Like, I'm going to hit with the flat of my blade because cutting that face would be a crime against nature. The fourth one would be abstract it a little and do the same thing I just said on attacks, but do it for criticals. So the player is critically hit less often, or the critical hits do less damage or are less severe. In Fallout, this was tied to luck. Your critical hits, you would be not as hurt by enemy critical damage as much. But I could see here attaching it to one of the speech skills, attaching it to an attribute, just to make the player character, less likely to be really hurt in combat. And then the final one is related to sneak, letting you do, backstab or something like that. You should be able to put down traps, or if it's a slightly more technological game, you can throw down mines, and it's part of a skill. So it's not something you have to have an inventory or have to set up in the world. It's just somebody's attacking you, and you can drop something like a bear claw or a mine, and it just goes off on them. This is something that you can think of as providing additional damage output to the player without actually having to get too involved in it and make it something that they have to craft and collect items for. It's just part of their skill. And then I mentioned, though that was for, skills, I've mentioned a couple times how you could have done it to a stat. And I want to bring up the Arcanum beauty stat, which I think got vastly underused in Arcanum. This is something that I would go back and look at. And there's two ways of looking at it, because you can either be so beautiful that no one wants to hurt you. So you can say a high beauty reduces the damage you take. Or you're too ugly to bear looking at. And this way, a low beauty stat could be you're targeted less often, or if somebody does target you after an attack or two, they tend to switch. Any way you want to spin that, I think it would be a really fun and cool use of beauty in a game. And remember, I made this character for Oblivion Remastered. So I assume the reason she was so good at sneak is that nobody liked looking at her, because she was ugly. Anyway, I wanted to finish this up by saying that was a good question, IE50, but I have made games that have pacifist playthroughs, and they're not very commonly taken, even though they are a perfectly valid way of playing through the game without killing anyone, or sometimes even hurting anyone. I've also made a video, and I'll link it below, on ideas I've had for moving RPGs past just combat, stealth, and dialogue solutions. Because I think there's a whole bunch of things that you can do in an RPG that are beyond those basic three things that have now been in RPGs for decades. So here's a question for you, dear viewers. How come no one's ever asked me about adding non-combat effects to combat skills? Because a lot of people, and I mean gamers and game designers, so game players and game designers, often make fun of players for being murder hobos. but then they don't provide any pacifist playthrough in their game. Or if there are pacifist playthroughs, they don't take them. So why aren't there non-combat effects on combat skills? And maybe I'll do a video on this, but I would like to point out I'm making this video in July, but it won't go up until September. So I won't see your comments on this one before if I make that other one. So it'll be interesting to see if I do make that one. I'd be interested to see what you guys think versus what I end up saying. So anyway, that's a question for you, something to think about, and I'm curious what your ideas are. And good question, IE50.